Hello friends, Clage back with another Anji guide today. We are going to be talking about one of, if not maybe, the most powerful tool in Anji's kit, his Autoguard counter super Kachoufuugetsu. Kachoufuugetsu is incredibly important to Anji's game, not just because of the power of the move itself, but because of how it changes game scenario and forces your opponent to be very aware of when you have it available. So, we're going to talk about the brass tacks of it, how the super works, how to utilize it, where it's the most useful, and then we're also going to talk about the actual mental layers and the more nuanced things of what Kachoufuugetsu does to your opponent's game plan, even when it's not being used. So, let's just jump right into it. I know I'm super verbose and take forever to talk, so I want to try and be a little bit more quicker with this one and show you why this move is so important to Anji's success and how to better utilize it. So let's just start off with the actual frame data and all that good stuff. So Kachoufuugetsu, active, frame 1. The second you do half circle back forward and hit the slash button, the first frame that input is read, you're in. You're now in the stance, you're waiting for them to swing in and activate the super. There was no hard frame data on how long Anji stays in the stance, so I just went ahead earlier, recorded a quick video, and frame counted myself. He is in the stance for 30 frames. Half a second total. So once you go into this, you have a half a second where your opponent can swing into it and activate the super. That's really generous, all things told. That's really long for a super of this style, especially one that's active on frame 1, especially in a game where characters have as fast as 3 frame normals. So not bad at all there. What's important to note is I also frame counted. Once the stance ends, there are 10 frames of just pure recovery, where Anji can't do anything, can't jump, can't block, can be punished for whiffing the super. What's important to note is that 10 frames is kind of shadowed by the fact that you're doing a catch counter Autoguard super, so they're not going to be that willing to swing at it when those recovery frames come up, because if they're a frame too early, well, they activate the super, and that's bad news for them. So, 1 frame startup, 30 frames active in the stance where the Autoguard super can be activated, 10 frames of recovery. So, 40 frames total on the whole move. So, in addition, this move has fantastic damage and fantastic scaling for what it is. This move, on its own, with no defensive modifiers, no guts, 186 damage, which is not bad at all for a 1-frame counter. Obviously, you start mitigating in things like guts kicking in or characters with higher defense modifiers like Potemkin, that damage lowers, but still, really solid damage. So, first, let's just show you the basic aspect of how this move works. So I've got Soul programmed to just throw one of his big winding normals. I'm going to have him do stand heavy and show you what happens when you activate Kachoufuugetsu. They swing into it. Anji goes into the full 6 hits. On Soul, I think this is about 179 damage. He has a slightly above average defense modifier, but still, almost 180 damage. Really, really good. So that animation will play out as long as you are within a decent range of the opponent and they use a move that is not a projectile to trigger the animation on Kachoufuugetsu. So one more time. There we go. Swung in that 30 frame window, eats the full 6 hits, go for the ride. If they're near the wall, you will wall break, and you get the hard knockdown for it. It works just like any other super that breaks the wall. You need to be somewhere around this range, about a quarter away from the corner. It does move forward when Anji does the dance, so it's not that hard to get to wall break, but obviously if you're mid-screen, you're not going to get a wall break out of this, so just be aware of that. So, the other thing that's important to note is the scaling on this move is fantastic. Even when Guts is kicking in, even with characters who have high defense modifiers, this thing scales really well. And in addition, if you happen to have 100% meter and can Roman cancel the last hit, you can do an absolute grip with this. Drop the last part, but that on its own was, I think, like 280. If you get the wall break and finish off that combo, it's 317 damage on Soul. That's a lot of damage. Yes, it's 100% meter. Yes, it's a very specific situation. But just to show you how well this super scales, that's really, really good. just be aware that while the entire super is, of course, unburstable because you can't burst during any super that you're hit by, as soon as you Roman cancel and go into it, they can burst. If they have burst on deck, you have to be prepared to either bait it or use a burst save combo, what have you. So, another thing to note is to get this Roman cancel at the end, as soon as it hits 6, Roman cancel and wait. Do not mash on Roman cancel, because if you do, you're going to end up getting a fast red Roman cancel, and you're going to end up dropping the combo. So just hit it once. That whole super animation has to play out before the Roman cancel will activate. So just hit it and be patient. It will come out, I promise you. The temptation is going to be to mash it because you don't see it, but that will completely flub up any chance you have of following up the combo. So just be aware of that. So that's the basic of how Kachoufuugetsu works. What's important to note is if Kachoufuugetsu is activated by a projectile, or if Anji is a good ways away from the opponent, he does a much more simple animation that does less hits and less damage. So let's grab Soul, have him do Yield Gunflame, and show you that animation. Two hits. The 4 hits in the middle are all taken out anytime you auto-guard a projectile or anytime you are a long distance away from the opponent. I don't know the exact distance, but I'll show you another example later that shows even if you get Kachoufuugetsu activated with a non-projectile, if you're far away, you will get that same 2-hit animation. So that drops 4 of the hits, and it also drops 60 damage. So those 4 hits in the middle do good damage. So it is important to note that you will do less damage off that version. What's also important to note is that if you auto-guard a projectile with Kachoufuugetsu, they are not locked into that animation like they are if they trigger it with a non-projectile move, like a normal or a special move that's not considered projectile. They activate Kachoufuugetsu with a non-projectile, that's it. They're locked in. It's a super, so they can't burst it. They can't Roman cancel anything. That is a forced, you are taking this entire damage no matter what. Projectiles still freeze them in place, but only when the super activates, and then they can do stuff. So if they were blocking at the start of the activation, then they're going to block the super. So let's have Soul one more time. Roman cancel and block after Gunflame. So now, blocked. What's important to note, if you notice, that first hit is a guard break. That gives the same style of guard break that, say, Potemkin's Garuda Impact does, that all of Gold Lewis's coffin specials do when he swings the coffin around. So that first hit's a guard break. That means you can do a lot, especially if you have enough to Roman cancel and go in afterwards. So keep that in mind. What should also be kept in mind, after that first hit, the iframes are gone on this move. You can be interrupted if you get the 2-hit version, and they're available to do something. And it doesn't have to be with something like a Dragon Punch. They can just swat you out of it. So definitely be aware that if you get that baited with a projectile and you don't force them to be locked into the whole super, you can be interrupted between the first and second hit. So just be very, very careful about that. So now we have kind of the brass tacks of what Kachoufuugetsu is, what it can do. You know, a 1-frame active counter super is incredible. Really, really good, because not only does that mean you only need 1 frame of leeway to have this activate and catch something, it means it's a tried and true viable reversal. If you get knocked down, you can do this during the reversal window, and if they try to meaty you, which is something that's very common in Guilty Gear Strive, because meaties are very good since you can't be thrown out of them as long as you time them right, this will blow those up. This will also blow up safe jumps, where people like to do stuff like Anji has a safe jump where he does Kachoufuugetsu and does like jumping slash on the way down to try and bait dragon punches, right? If you do that and they reversal Kachoufuugetsu on wake up, yeah, you're getting hit. It's going to beat a safe jump all on its own. So, incredibly strong, incredibly powerful tool. Really strong reversal for Anji. By far his best defensive tool because it makes frame traps and other things not nearly as viable. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a truly strong move. This is a truly powerful tool for Anji. And learning how to use it is super important. But what's even more important about learning how to use this move is that the threat of it is honestly just as good, if not more impactful than actually using Kachoufuugetsu itself. Because what happens is, as we've talked about in other videos, Anji has a lot of notable flaws in his game plan, right? He doesn't have fast buttons to interrupt with. You can frame trap him very easily because he doesn't really have any invulnerable moves to work with. Autoguard doesn't start up fast enough because it needs 10 frames of leeway to do so. This doesn't. This is off frame. If there's a 1 frame gap in someone's pressure and you can buffer this right, they lose for using that 1 frame gap. So what happens is, as soon as Anji has 50% of meter, as soon as 50% tension is on deck, now the game scenario changes. Now suddenly, bad guys can't just walk up and constantly do, far S or close S into stand heavy to try and frame trap you. They can't just walk up and do, close S, stand kick. There's a gap there now, which means if you catch them autopiloting any of their basic pressure strings, you can interrupt them. They are now at risk for doing their good tried and true game plan against you. And what this means is, obviously, having that tool and using that interrupt is very powerful. It's very strong. It gets you out of situations where you're under the gun and you don't really have a good escape option, right? But what's more important is it's going to alter how your opponent plays. They're going to be less likely to do those frame traps. They're going to be less likely to throw really long-range pokes that are designed to catch you but keep them safe, because even at range, you can still catch a long-range poke and punish the hell out of it. Real quick, let's just have bad guy again. Far S, right? This move is ridiculous. Giant active hitbox, has a ton of active frames, swats you out all kinds of stuff, right? Nope. I have 50% meter. That move is now a much higher risk than it was before I had 50% meter on deck. So this whole change in the game scenario for Anji is something that is great in every matchup, but it is almost vital in some of his matchups to get to 50% meter to force people to play against you differently. You tone down frame traps. You tone down long-range pokes that are laggy and have a lot of active frames, because that's really easy to activate Kachoufuugetsu. And what you're going to do is you're going to force your opponent to want to use strategies that are probably not near as optimal. They're going to break off frame traps and then try and catch you, inputting Autoguard and trying to catch them. When they knock you down, they're not going to immediately meet you. They're going to wait and see and then try and throw you. And throws are the big important part of this, because while I'm talking up all the praise of Kachoufuugetsu and how powerful this move is and how much it changes the game scenario, there's one major problem with it, and that is it has the same innate weakness that Anji's entire gameplay has. It loses to throws. If someone sniffs you out doing this, they just run up and grab you, and now you're knocked down, you wasted 50% meter, and they have offensive advantage. So, because it loses to the exact same thing that Autoguard does, this does have a weakness that is going to be commonly used against you. The nice thing is that with this, there's not nearly the commitment, because you don't have to constantly throw this, throw it out like you do spin, looking to advance or looking to catch a button. You can pick and choose a lot more when you want to use Kachoufuugetsu. And because of that, now you're going to get opponents that are going to want to do stuff like run up and dash throw you a lot more. And that can be effective if you're being predictable. But if you're paying attention, that means you can do stuff like poke them at long range for dashing at you blatantly. You can steal some turns when they do a block string and then don't try to follow it up because they don't want to risk getting hit by Kachoufuugetsu, even though they might be up frames or even though they still have offensive advantage. It'll allow you more ways to escape pressure and maybe air dash out or jump away. It might even allow you enough of a window to try and auto guard, though like I said, same flaw, it can get thrown. But what it could even do is if someone's being really respectful of Kachoufuugetsu, you can be disrespectful to their offense. They might back off willingly trying to bait out doing it, and now you get to run up and do stuff like this and knock them down. In neutral, the same thing applies. This is a move that you can make a hard read in neutral, and it's a very valid play. You can dash up at someone who's trying to create space and just go, I think you're going to swing. That is a very viable thing. That's a bet. It's a big bet, and it's a risk. And if you lose that wrist, that doesn't feel very good. But just the threat of you possibly being able to go up and do something like this now means that you're a little bit more free to move around in neutral. You can do more fishing with sweep to try and get counter hits. You can do more fishing with Fujin to try and get counter hits. You can even more safely throw out stuff like Far Slash because your opponent's not going to be as likely to hit a fast button trying to interrupt it because this is here. It is available and it's something that they have to account for at all times. So it's important to note that the more conditionable and the more aware of game scenario that players are, the better this gets. So like people who just don't care and are going to bulldog you no matter what, well, then all you're going to do is look for the first gap you can find, interrupt them, and then do 180 damage to them for not changing their game plan. But against stronger players who know how powerful this move is, this is what's going to allow you to actually play matchups a little bit more aggressively and be able to kind of tilt that risk-reward a little bit more back in Anji's favor. This doesn't solve all his problems, not by a long shot. But the threat of 50% meter and being able to do this and threaten opponents not just in offense, but in neutral, and when they have you pinned down, that changes the game plan. It changes it drastically. And so it's really important, just like with all the things Anji does, to start getting reads on your opponent. What is their tendency? Most good players and most players who are aware of how strong Kachoufuugetsu are going to start running up and throwing you a lot. They're going to look for tick throws a lot. Because leaving a gap where you go, oh man, there's the frame trap, it's time for me to Autoguard, and then they just walk up and throw you out of it, that's going to be a very good game plan for them to try to execute. But that game plan probably isn't near as optimal as their really good frame traps or their really strong pressure with using meter, things like that. They have to keep everything gapless at that point, right? So because of throw being the antithesis of this, it being the direct counter, what you need to be aware of is anyone who has a good throw game gets far better against Kachoufuugetsu. So anyone who has a command grab, this move definitely becomes a much higher risk. It's still good. It's still something you should look to utilize, even if you're just utilizing the threat of its existence. But against like Bad Guy, who can run up and wild throw you, or against Potemkin, who can P-Buster you out of any auto guard you do, you need to be a little bit more picky and choosy about how you try to use this move. It definitely loses some value against characters with command grabs. Nagoriyuki, his really long throw range and his command grab definitely makes it more tricky to use this. That doesn't mean it's a dead move. This is not like trying to do Fujin follow-ups to Leo kind of thing. It's still an important aspect to have because, again, the threat of 50% meter for Anji is one of the strongest things he has going for him. It's also, in my opinion, why Anji is so meter-starved. Everyone's meter-starved in this game. Roman cancels are where it's at. They're incredible. Roman cancels are raw power in this game. And this is another form of that raw power. It's really good. So, a lot of times, you really want to try to avoid using faultless defense a lot, or BRCing in neutral, or YRCing under pressure, because if you can build up to 50%, you now get to play a different game, a game that has a variable that your opponent can't ignore, and if they do it at their own peril. Because even if all that happens is you catch someone, you get a hard knockdown and you did 180 damage if it's unprorated, right? That's really good. So, the things to look out for with Kachoufuugetsu, we talked about how it doesn't work against projectiles exactly the same, and that if your opponent uses a projectile to bait it out, they can punish you. The other thing to be aware of with this move is it will not autocorrect in any way, shape, or form. If someone does a jump in that's really high above them or crosses you up in any way, this is not going to work. Let me give you a prime example here. Soul cross-up jump kick. Not a super common thing because Soul doesn't really need this cross-up, but just for the sake of showing you what happens. Nope. Nothing. Absolutely not going to do anything. They're going to be free to run up and hit you between the hits or just punish you at the end of it. So this thing does not beat cross-ups. It flat out loses to them. If you're playing a Leo and they're trying to cross you up with Berserker Slash, this is not your answer. It loses every time. So be very careful about moves that can have really far-reaching down hitboxes that will just make the initial 2-hit part of this whiff. Crossups will always do it, and there are other situations where it can happen too, so just be aware of that. The last couple things I want to talk about, because the main point of this video was to highlight just how important this is for changing the game plan that Anji has, is that there are a couple interesting oddities about Kachoufuugetsu. One is that Autoguard has the natural recovery. We talked about this in the Autoguard video. 9 frames of recovery, right? That you're in counter hit state. See that? You can actually cancel into Kachoufuugetsu after the Autoguard frames are done on spin. This doesn't matter how long you hold it. This is not something to rely on, but if you make a bet on Autoguard and your opponent kind of waits and they're looking to not throw you, but instead counter hit you for big damage because they know spin is in counter hit state, you can catch people with cheeky stuff like this. It's a very, very niche, but very important thing to know about this move. So that's one thing to know. The other thing I want to show real quick is how this move works against long-range pokes that aren't projectiles. So the prime example of this is going to be Axel. This matchup is one of those matchups where your goal as Anji, besides the obvious of find a way to get to Axel so you can put pressure on him, is get to 50% meter. Because all of Axel's pokes, right? Stand punch, jump slash, all these buttons, these all have incredible range. They're super annoying to deal with, right? None of these are projectiles. The only thing he has that's projectile is Rinsen. The other stuff is just a normal. It's just a strike normal. And what's important to note, all these moves have hurt boxes on them. And have hurt boxes where they hit you. So, if we have Axel do a max range stand punch, see how far that still hit? Super important to note in matchups like this. Nagoriyuki sword normals, Axel pokes, all that stuff, super, super good times to use Kachoufuugetsu. That will do work for you in these matchups. Because sometimes the only thing you want to do against some of these characters is just get in. And that is a way you can get in against an Axel. So keep that in mind. Again, if they throw Rinsen and you autoguard that at max range, that's not going to work. Because they're going to be able to act and you're probably going to get punished for doing it. But this also kind of works the same way. It's not going to be near as much of the threat to Axel players and Nagoriyuki players because they use their zoning. That's how they play the game. That's how they're effective. But if you start swatting people away by getting Kachoufuugetsu on a max range stand punch or a max range jump slash against Axel, they're going to be a little bit more tentative about throwing stuff out when you have 50% meter. And that might allow you to wiggle your way into pressuring him a lot easier. So that's basically the nuts and bolts of what I want to talk about in this video. Obviously, I wanted to show how the Autoguard works for those who haven't really used it or don't know anything about it. Wanted to show the raw data. Again, for whatever reason, Dustloop hasn't frame counted how long the stance was active. Now we know it's 30 frames. Pretty cool. 10 frames of recovery after. Talk about how to use it on reversal. I went over in my Q&A video how to practice doing this on reversal. Just program a dummy to knock you down and then do a meaty against you. And then just have them replay that over and over again until you get good at the reversal timing. You can slow down your motion, as I talked about in that video. If you're struggling to get this out, slow down your input some. Because it's really easy to go too fast and miss a corner or end up going to up back or something like that. So just slow down your input. That'll help you hit this a lot more consistently. Half circle back forward is an annoying input. It really is an annoying input. It's really easy to miss quarters. But practice using it as a reversal. It'll beat safe jumps. It beats meaties. It deters people from running their offense quite as heavily. It's an amazing interrupt. It shuts down frame traps as long as you can buffer it well. And then, more importantly, and probably the most important thing to take away from this video, just the threat of this can be more impactful on your matches than actually using it. Being able to make your opponents use less optimal strategies, to be more forced to try and go for blatant throw attempts and tick throw attempts, that can play to your advantage. You can use that, and you can take scenarios where Anji is usually not all that great on the risk-reward factor, because as I've talked about, Risk reward's a problem for him. It usually skews against him in a lot of situations. With 50% meter on deck, you can make a lot of those risk rewards situations a lot more viable and can sometimes even tilt them into your favor. So do not overlook this move. Do not forget to use this move. Do not forget how powerful it is. And start really paying attention to how people act when you have 50% meter. Sometimes you're going to have to show this to them. You're going to have to actually hit them with it or use it on your wake up or throw it out in neutral to show people like, I will try and catch you with this. But any kind of player worth their salt, as soon as they know that you will use this, that this is a threat, they're going to change the game plan. And that's your chance to try and be a little bit more disrespectful on defense, to try and be a little bit more aggressive in neutral, and to try and earn your offensive advantage a little bit easier. So that's pretty much it. Kachoufuugetsu is not a super complicated move, but what it does to the game scenario and what it does to the status of the match is a lot more layered and nuanced and gets into the, I know that they know situations that fighting games like to put on us. And this is a big one. So hopefully this helps you out thinking about how to utilize the move itself, but also how to utilize the threat of it better, because I think that's a really important thing for Anji to do. You can really improve your overall Anji game plan by doing that. So, as always, I appreciate you all watching. I appreciate all the feedback and input. If you have any questions, leave me some comments. I'll try and get to them, clear up anything I might have missed or that isn't totally clear. If you want to do the like, subscribe thing, cool. I always appreciate it. And, yeah, the replay system thing is a real problem. It's really screwed up with the update since Gold Lewis came out. I'll do my best to just live record matches so I can still upload stuff for y'all. But until then, I'm going to stop being verbose for once and keep a guide under 30 minutes and let you all get out of here. So thank you so much for watching. Please take care of yourselves. Be good to one another. And I will catch you on the next one. So until then, later.